Let's call the Prime Minister the open debate. Yeah.
The very idea for you to form a few small cities in your country itself already proves that there's a sustainable economic development in your country that is holistic, which will lead developing countries to achieve development at the end of the day. I'm going to analyze to you why, when you only concentrate and saturate your wealth in only one particular metropolis in your country, it's only detrimental towards achieving a holistic development, which is extremely important nations as a whole. But before that, let's analyze a few things coming up from the debate today. Number one, what are small cities, right? These are cities which will eventually be developed. We may concede that to a certain extent now, in the short term, that these cities may be small, but you also need to concede and understand that these small cities are continuously improving and developing day by day. They are going to be metropolis at the end of the day. We think we still are able to absorb the benefits that they are going to talking about metropolis, right? Because at the end of the day, small cities are going to become metropolis. They are going to develop also. The question they need to answer coming from this debate is why focusing on only one metropolis is much better for holistic development. And look, redistribution of wealth towards every single part of society is extremely crucial in developing your nation, right? Yeah, why they can't achieve that? Because number one, it is harder for you to become developed when you only saturate your wealth and your riches in one particular place. Number two, after you become developed, the metropolis is the only concentration and saturation of wealth. It cannot be broken down. You cannot have the saturation and redistribution of wealth and resources to every single member of society. There's already an existing rich-poor gap. You only enlarge that rich-poor gap, right? But number two, let's analyze the situation in metropolis. Sit down. The only place that are developed in the nation is the metropolis, right? The standard of living is much higher than other areas there, right? It's saturated with competition, oversaturated with competition and investment, right? And these saturations of investments doesn't expand to other areas, right? Because corporations, people want to invest in hubs where they think that they can develop the most, and other areas where they need to start from scratch, they don't have the incentive to develop there because they think that it's a waste of investment. They only invest in metropolis. That investment cannot spread to other areas as a whole. Why, especially in developing nations, that redistribution of wealth is so crucial, right? Because when you already have a rich-poor gap, when you continuously develop metropolis only, it is the only developed place in an area out of metropolis aren't able to get a good standard of health, of life also. We give an example such as Malaysia itself, where every single individual is incentivized to go to Kuala Lumpur, right? And when you look at the standard of living in Pahang, Perlis, Kelantan, and etc., the standard of living is much lower compared to Kuala Lumpur itself, right? We think when you compare them to China, when you compare them to Korea itself, when you have the holistic development, even in Seoul, Busan itself, they have almost the same standard of living, right? We think that's the holistic development that you can achieve under side government today. I'm going to analyze to you three harms. Number one, how there's a first level discrimination. Number two, how there's a facade of wealth. And number three, how there's a lobbying power which then enlarges the rich-poor gap. Right, before that, go.
The problem is that developing nations rely on inflow of investment to get the money to build up smaller cities. Your side jeopardizes that because the barriers for entry for building in smaller cities are far higher than building in metropolises.
No, the barrier for you to build smaller cities is when you continuously invest in metropolis only. When you redistribute the resources to other places, you can also develop smaller cities which eventually develop into metropolis also. We absorb the benefit that you want to talk about. First argument, how there's an unchallengeable instilled discrimination that undermines holistic development. First level, let's analyze metropolis as a whole. There are three things we need to talk about in metropolis. Number one, how there's an overcrowding situation in metropolis. Number two, how there's a continuously rising cost of living. Sit down, because there's an oversaturation and overpopulation in metropolis also. Many people are unemployed, right? This is caused by the saturation of wealth in one area only. Number two, then the question becomes, why are individuals still incentivized to stay and to move towards metropolis? main preconception that they have towards these cities is that this is the hub of wealth, this is the hub of richness, I can go. So if you're a person from a village itself, you're incentivized to go to Metropolis because you have a preconception, you have a preconceived notion that the Metropolis is the only place for you to get a job and etc. Right? But look, we think that that's false because of this. Number one, how there's a facade of wealth, right? Because look, you need to concede that in Metropolis itself, there's a continuously rising cost of living. And look, those areas now move to Metropolis, they are unable to afford the high cost of living. What do these individuals then look to, right? They live in slums, which are much outskirts areas of Metropolis itself. And why is living in slums that harmful also? Because look, you also need to concede that slums are near Metropolis, and the cost of living in slums are also high. You force these individuals to believe there's a facade of wealth for them already. They are unable to get proper jobs already. They are unable to get a minimum wage also, and they still cannot afford the cost of living in itself already. We think that that's bad. And there's no incentive for corporations to develop slums, because in order for you to develop slums, you need to start from scratch. There's no incentive, and there's no way for these people to opt out from the hell situation that they are already in. Number two, let's analyze first level discrimination. Even if that there are some individuals from out areas that are able to afford the cost of living in Metropolis, we think that there's already a preconceived notion from the rich towards the poor already. When you continue to force these poor people towards the rich, which will continuously discriminate them even more, right? That's when these individuals are unable to opt out from the rich poor get victimized and antagonized in their surrounding. Number three, how is the lobbying power already, right? Because you need to also understand that the poor people are segregated. The rich people fight for one aim, is to preserve their wealth. When you already have first class discrimination towards the poor, that will lobby for more powers in order to enlarge the rich-poor gap. They want to get rid of the poor from Metropolis itself. You don't get holistic development. Why is then developing small cities much better than development, right? You only get the redistribution of wealth when your country is still developing. When it's already developed, it's hard for you to break down metropolises. The redistribution of wealth is now much better to achieve development now. For all these reasons, go with side government.
Thank you very much. To open the case inside opposition, House calls for leader call.
Here's what we're going to show you in today's debate. First of all, focusing on smaller cities is economically inefficient and will make you lose the development of free trade and foreign direct investment that developing countries need. Secondly, why choosing to prioritize metropolises allows for the best development that eventually will trickle down to smaller cities. If we can show you these two things, then it is clear that we get better development for the country. Let me clarify a few things. First of all, obviously our case is not an abandonment of smaller cities. That is not a reasonable burden for side opposition. The fact is, we say that we should first prioritize metropolises, and eventually the effects that they gain will trickle down to the smaller cities. Firstly, let me deal with a few rebuttals from what Ryan came. It is not a trade-off. I want to make that clear. It is firstly a prioritization of the metropolises, then these effects will slowly trickle down towards the smaller cities. Look, the fact is, they said it becomes harder to develop when you saturate. It is exactly the converse. It is far easier to become developed when you saturate because the labor market increases. You have better infrastructure. Everything is concentrated in one region, and this is heavily focused on in my substantive. Now, let's look at some of the other things that Ryan came up and told us. He has told us that redistribution of wealth is good. That is true, but it is not a contentious issue. We will show you why our model better achieves this. Look, they've come up and told that it is discrimination. No, thank you, Kim. The fact is, it is not. Using their logic, by them prioritizing these smaller cities, it is discrimination too. The fact is, we are telling you, firstly, we will prioritize metropolises, and the spill-down effect will benefit the smaller cities. And I'm going to show you exactly how. It is true, there will be some slums, but they have clearly failed to understand what development economies are. There are certain things that will happen, but as time progresses, these problems are solved. Okay, let me get on to a few things. And I will touch on the rich-poor gap, which Ryan mentioned later. Look, how are we going to achieve this? Firstly, we're going to give tax breaks to corporations that set up base in metropolises or places that we want to become metropolises. Secondly, we will incentivize skills training for the population to cater to demands of labor market. Thirdly, we will support metropolises. And fourthly, we will housing burdens of metropolises. For example, the HDB model, which is applied in Singapore. Now, we think that these things need to happen in metropolises first for a holistic development in the country. And I'm going to show you why. Firstly, on my first substantive, let us look at what the difficulties of developing smaller areas are. The first obvious thing is economies of scale. The fact is, you have to have public services, you have to have transportation networks, you have to have all the infrastructure that is required for countries. In a metropolis, it is cheaper. When everything is centralized, it is possible to walk from place to place. It is easier to transport goods and materials that you will production within the metropolis. In smaller cities, let's also look at police and fire departments, the other infrastructures that are needed. Concentrate everything within one area. It is far cheaper for me to build one police station, one fire station, and expand it, rather than build multiple fire stations and multiple police stations in smaller cities. The fact is, the costs are cheaper. It is easier for you to build one and expand it, okay? When we look at the smaller cities, they are less efficient because what you have a smaller fire station, you have smaller roads, you have smaller transport. No, thank you, Kim. You have smaller large transportation system that can be developed within the metropolis. It is far more efficient. Yes.
Look, your trickle-down effect in your alternative world is that assuming people actually want to actually have that trickle-down effect.
Oh no, I will show you why it actually occurs for sure. Let's look at secondly at the geographical constraints within these smaller cities. The fact is, smaller cities aren't just smaller cities because we call them smaller cities. The fact is, there are physical barriers. Let's do a comparison of Kuala Lumpur and Sabah and Sarawak and why development has focused certain areas of Sabah and Sarawak first. The fact is, it is mountainous in a very large amount of Sabah and Sarawak. The reason that the city of Kota Kinabalu has developed firstly is due to the fact that it's easier. It is easier for you to develop on flat land rather to go and cut down mountains and to build on these things. It is much harder when you're able to focus your development one first and then only spread out. That is how you truly benefit the country. No, thank you. It is metropolises become metropolises for a reason, and the fact is it is cheaper and easier. The fact is when you have smaller areas that are hard to access, of course your transportation costs go higher. If I'm Dell and I set up in a place which is mountainous, obviously it is going to become more expensive for me to bring my material to that place to produce my computers and to export those things. It is far cheaper to create a huge hub like in Bayan and Penang, where Intel has come, Dell has come, Western Digital has come. Why have they come? Because it is cheaper for them. They have economies of scale. Yes, Ryan?
You're redundant because the cost of living in metropolis is already high. Because look, when there's no incentive, it's impossible for you to break the saturation of wealth. In the future, when you're already developed, how can you then achieve holistic development?
Ryan, this is why we have taxation in countries. Taxation, progressive taxation is meant for the distribution of wealth. Once countries develop, they are able to introduce policies that apply for the distribution of wealth. If a country is not developed, if a country is in the poor, they aren't able to have that wealth. First you get the wealth, then you focus on the distribution. That is what you do in development economics. When we look at the network of labor, no thank you, and the factors of production. The fact is, within a metropolis, there's a larger diversity of skilled labor and infrastructure, and this is due to the size and scale of the area. The simple fact is, it is bigger. You're far likely to have a wider pool of talents, a wider pool of people within that country, and this is the clincher to this one. The key point is, this diversity is what causes foreign multinational and transnational companies to come to your cities and develop there. The fact is, when it is more expensive, there's less incentive for these companies to come. If your roads are really small and they're not big, companies are not going to come there. The reason why there's been huge development in cities, like if we look at the Hoyt model of how cities have developed along the infrastructure, it clearly shows us that companies are coming there because it is easier for them. The M4 corridor, the M5 corridor, all these things. And we look at in terms of attracting FDI, your side is far worse. This is why, because MNCs can choose where they want to invest. If they know that there's better infrastructure in a certain area, it's much bigger, much cheaper for them, they will come there first. And the fact is, there is a trickle-down effect because when you prioritize this area, the city has it will have to expand. The city starts in the center and then it expands outwards to the smaller cities. When you have a large city, it has to expand because there's just no more space for you to live. So eventually people will start moving outwards and the people in the small cities will come in. Urbanization occurs. people from the smaller cities come in to gain jobs. And the fact is there will be no more waste eventually, and that's when your city starts growing. That's when you have trickle-down effects. There are multiplier effects. When people come to trade, they need to buy food, they need to buy their things. All this money comes in, and then the money that is gained by the traders is spent again in their daily necessities. This is not a trade-off. This debate is about what we do first in order to ensure the proper holistic development of a country. It has to be done in a method that will serve everybody in the country. It is a poor idea to think that by prioritizing smaller cities first, you truly achieve what is best for a country. Side opposition, very proud. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leader of Opposition. The Education Side Government House of Deputy Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to talk to you about the benefits of transportation. I'm going to talk to you about how you cannot deprive individuals of the basic right of happiness and how they ignored everything under Ryan's side. But let's talk about a few rebuttals that we have under to their side before we move to my extension, right? First, how we can never become metropolises in this instance, right? We don't think that that's necessarily true. Why so? We think resources can still be extracted under paradigm, right? We're not preventing that from happening. We think companies will still go there and still extract in that instance. We think the potential to become metropolises still exists. But second, they never proved to us what's the benefit of metropolises in the first place. What's the big deal of having a metropolis in the first place when we prove to you all the benefits that come with having smaller cities to begin with, right? But even if you want to agree that they did prove a benefit, right? We think under our side, we have sustainability. We allow for individuals to be sustained in their economic growth and to grow with these smaller cities to begin with. We think there's a benefit that doesn't exist under their side. But the second idea on investors, right? And when you create metropolis, investors will want to come, right? Here's the deal with investors, Mr. Speaker. We think why they still want to go to metropolis is simple, because it's overcrowding in that instance, right? You have a larger market. Sit down. You have higher prices in this instance, right? This is when companies will want to target those places to be, because it's where the largest market exists. That's when more public purchases of their properties can happen to begin with, right? That only exists within metropolises to begin with. If you allow metropolises, you only encourage investing within metropolises to begin with, right? Well, the second idea, we think if your country is you still want to extract resources to begin with, right? We don't think it's mutually exclusive to your paradigm. If you want to extract resources, but then we'll still go to smaller cities and extract resources to begin with and under our paradigm. But why is it better? We think when prices are lower in this instance, right, they're more likely to want to invest because it's cheaper to build up and to build their factories, etc. within smaller cities to begin with. We think we encourage investment in that area, but we think it's also for long term. We think it's also for the long term in that instance because these smaller cities will be able to build themselves up as well. On this third idea, so sit down, Davesh, on not abandoning smaller cities in this instance. We don't think you can have both on the side, right? Why so? We think that trickle-down effect was this, right? The cities will have to expand in this instance, right? We think it's a long-term benefit that's extremely far-fetched, right? We think the idea is like, look at Malaysia, Mr. Speaker, where you have Kuala Lumpur and then you have cities like Kelantan, where they don't have these kind of facilities to begin with, right? We think it's extremely far-fetched. But the second idea, we don't think you can have the best of both worlds to begin with for two reasons, right? First, we think that under your paradigm, when you tax free corporations to begin with, right? You say build up in our metropolises, we won't charge you. That's when you encourage them to build within metropolises only, Mr. Speaker. You don't allow them to go towards other areas and have the incentive to build up in other areas because you're taxing them free. Here, we think that because you're taxing them free in metropolises, the fact that they have to pay extra to build up their cities in smaller cities is a deterrent to begin with, right? But we think on the second level, corporations we think that when corporations want to build up cities, right, they have to start from scratch in this instance, right? Because if you already have a metropolis with tax-free, where they already have facilities, they'll be more likely to want to build up there to begin with and not build up in smaller cities where they have to start from scratch and pay tax in this instance, right? Well, this fourth idea on transportation and police stations, Mr. Speaker. Here's the thing, right? We don't think that's mutually exclusive. You can have a police station in your smaller cities for all we know, okay? If you want to talk about transportation, right? We think that overcrowding already exists within metropolises to begin with, right? You have traffic jams, Mr. Speaker. You have things like this. You can't get your police to the area under your paradigm to begin with, right? But even if you want to argue that you'll still be able to do this, you need to concede to the short-term harm, right? Fine, maybe you won't have as many police stations or transportations to exist within smaller cities to begin with, right? But under your paradigm, your cities will be the only ones with large roads. Your cities will be the only one that jobs can move from places to places, right? We think under our side, we allow transportation to exist everywhere within the nation as a whole. We allow from the distribution of resources from one city to another city to begin with. We think this is when we benefit and we allow for growth of the entire nation as a whole. We don't think you allow that to happen under your side. On this fifth idea of multinational companies, how do they want to invest because you have more foreign people and stuff like that, right? We think under our side, this is what happens, right? When you have multiple cities, you incentivize individuals from other countries to come to different cities to begin with because you have different areas to begin with, right? We think this is when you have multiple nationals, this is when you have multiple this is when you benefit individuals of the nation as a whole. Before I move on, Shatabesh.
Yes, in the long run, it's clear that both sides reach the same outcome. The question is which side gets it done faster. Your side scales it down by choosing it's difficult to develop and then are isolated because they don't bring together all of the economy in one.
Two levels of responses, right? First, we don't paradigm, right? We don't think you allow metropolises to build up within your whole nation as a whole, right? Whereas under our paradigm, we just look at the parallel of South Korea, right? Where they did urban planning and they allow for their nation to build up as a whole. We think under our paradigm, we provide the best chance of long-term benefit. I think that long-term is always more exponential than short-term to begin with. So what's my extension for you in today's debate? And how you have to prioritize everything. First level, with the mentality of individuals in this instance, right? When you have corporations telling them a Ferrari in a city, when you have individuals showing you driving a car from a slum towards a city, you get happier progressively as you go towards the city, laughing and drinking and stuff like that within cities in themselves, and you paint a picture that happiness exists within cities to begin with, right? That's when they perceive happiness as something that's financial. That's when they perceive happiness as something that solely exists within cities to begin with, right? That's when you create the mindset for the individual that they need to go towards cities to be happy, that they need to go towards cities, and that's their main goal in life, right? They campaign to be able to go towards cities to begin with, and they can never be happy of this. So this is when we think you can only perceive they have another opportunity to opt out of this mindset, right? This is when you constantly have them to want to go towards cities to be happy to begin with, right? No, sit down. But we think why do corporations never stop doing this in this instance? Because they want individuals to continue purchasing their products and the best place to do it, right? That's why corporations will continue having these videos, corporations will continue doing this propaganda. You think we never break that cycle under your side, right? Within the conclusion to this first level is this: the perception of individuals that the only way to achieve happiness is within cities in themselves, right? The second level, how does that not exist under our paradigm? We think when you're centered around individuals with the same financial status as you, our financial status is somewhat similar, right? When you have this relative house as your neighbor in this instance, we think this when you're able to no longer have that comparison, that direct comparison. We're able to see someone with a mansion or someone with a 5-star apartment in front of you, and you're living in the slums in this instance, right? I think this is when you allow for individual rational opt-out in this instance, because they understand that happiness is not something that depends upon wealth, right? We draw the parallel of Bangladesh. It's one of the happiest countries in the world, regardless of whether they're living in slums or not, because the individuals living around them are happy as well. Individuals living around them are in the same status that they are in. We think under our side benefit individuals here because they're able to have this, right? But why is it that in our paradigm, even if metropolises exist, even if metropolises eventually come out faster than each other, it will still be beneficial, right? Because we think that in this instance, because they've lived in areas where everyone around them is happy in themselves, if they want to opt in, it will be more rational in this instance, right? They have a more rational calculus to want to opt in because they'll be able to value it in this instance, right? We think under our side, that's an exclusive benefit. We think under your side, you prevent individuals from the basic right of being happy. You don't allow metropolises to exist. If you want to benefit the nation, not the city, stick with side government.
Thank you very much, Deputy Prime Minister. Continue is the side opposition. House calls Deputy Leader of All.
A very good morning, everyone. Clearly, this crowd is extremely objective and impartial to the debate, but unfortunately for them, economics decided based on happiness and people alone. It's decided based on pragmatism and what gets it done in the long run. I'm going to show that initially on humans, why they are important, why sometimes they aren't, and why we have to make a choice. Secondly, on cooperation, do they come in? Why will they expand in our model and what boosts? And finally, on the pace of development, because let's acknowledge one thing: if time all countries developed, the question in this debate is which side gets that done faster, given the human suffering that they wanted to talk about. I'm going to show you that our side both gets it done faster, allows local corporations and businesses to develop, and that's extremely important for a country, but also gets things done in an economically pragmatic way. Let's first talk about what they said about humans and discrimination. So clearly this is not a debate about discrimination because both sides have to discriminate at some level. Their side wants to discriminate against metropolises, our side wants to prioritize metropolises. So discrimination exists on both levels, it's which one you prioritize. There is a reason why we can't base this on happiness alone. And the reason is as follows. If your argument is opting out of the rich-poor gap and you examine inequality, these are problems that sometimes are endemic to corruption in a country. There are plenty of countries that developed in line with our model that examine and show the principles of this. For example, if you look at Australia, which developed metropolises first, for example, they developed Sydney and Melbourne, those metropolises become bustling in their own right and then expand outwards, which is why they created the city of Canberra after that. That's how development occurs, and I'm going to be analyzing this much further in my speech. She wanted to talk about happiness. This is really a moot point because it's non-contentious. Obviously, both sides would prefer happiness to exist. The question is, do we try to take an economically inefficient move to get happiness that might be present now, or do we operate in a sustainable long-term manner? On corporations, here's what their side loses. What they wanted to ignore throughout the course of this debate is that developing nations do not have the size, scale, or wealth to develop smaller areas to begin with. That is why they rely on foreign direct investment to get the funds, infrastructure, and investment that they need in order to expand and radiate outwards towards smaller areas. Here's the problem. Those corporations, as selfish as it seems, do not care about humans. They do not care about improving happiness in your country. They care about profit, and they are motivated solely by that. Given that there is plenty of competition in emerging markets throughout the world, if you choose to prioritize, and by the way, I want to highlight one thing, they were never actually very clear with how they wanted to prioritize smaller areas. Like we didn't hear any from both sides was clear with how we wanted to do that. So let's implement our small cities. Options aren't going to come in. Options are limited. There are plenty of areas around the world in which they can invest. So if you come at a natural disadvantage, to get rid, invest in your country. Why would I, as a corporation, want to invest in an area which is a geographic challenge, which is disconnected from other areas, has smaller human capital, has smaller factors of production, and is disconnected from other areas and expanding? I, as a corporation, am more likely to invest in a place like Kuala Lumpur than I am to invest in a place like, say, Perlis. And here is the problem. Government prioritize people. But in order for a government to be able to prioritize people, they need the economic viability and funds to be able to do that. Our side doesn't get that, because what our side can do after we grow metropolises is use the foreign direct investment and funds we have gained development in those areas to redistribute it back to smaller countries like India. A large problem of it is not that they don't have money, but that the country is corrupt. Assuming a benign state clearly believes its nature of the state, that we can't use those funds to economically efficient ways to develop smaller countries. And that's why in Malaysia, even in states like Kelantan and Terengganu, we see the creation of smaller cities first. For example, Kota Baru, which is expanding as a metropolis before trickling down to the smaller areas of Kelantan. That is an economically efficient model. So what do they lose, and what is the conclusion of this? They are losing the initial inflow of corporations that is very important in order to get a country to develop, given that developing nations do not have that initial startup ability to begin with. What they are also losing is the ability to scale. For example, even as they get corporations, the barriers that exist in those smaller cities are great because they are disconnected from each other. In other words, even if they develop, the extent to which they can develop is smaller. And look, in the PM speech, they said they wanted to turn smaller cities into metropolises. So the harms of everything said about metropolises will still accrue to their side if assuming that they want to turn smaller cities into metropolises. So it doesn't make any sense. Like the debate calls for to turn smaller cities into metropolises, but to defend the creation of smaller cities that expand outwards, not turn every small city in the country into a metropolis, because if that was true, all the harms that they painted would still accrue. Before I go on to talk about expansion, go ahead.
What Sydney and Melbourne are small cities developing together, even if we are to concede that your side may be somewhat faster, it's still a saturation of bridge in one area because the government is just constantly providing for the saturation.
Yes. Okay. So first false claim, like I've never heard in my life that Sydney and Melbourne are smaller cities. If anyone in this room really believes that Sydney and Melbourne are metropolises, I'm sure that's not a contentious issue in this debate. Next, my next level of analysis, which responds to the sneaky second POI that he sneaked in, about why corporations have an incentive to expand. Like, look, this is pretty simple logic. If I'm a corporation and the saturation in a metropolis happens that he talked about, what is my natural incentive? First, I have a profit incentive to grow, which means that after I've established a base, I want to make use of the other human capital in a country, which is why corporations often, after establishing base, then expand outwards. Secondly, corporations don't lead, and this is the key point under our side. Once corporations have established a base there and built infrastructure there and tied themselves to a country, they are much less likely to leave in the long term. Which means that after we establish corporate bases in our metropolises, that money can then be channeled into the development of smaller areas, and then we can deprioritize metropolises. The reason this can happen is that corporations in the long now a vested interest in that metropolis and a vested interest in our country, which is why if you look at the development models of many Scandinavian or European countries, that's exactly how development occurs, radiating outwards from metropolises. Pace of development. One, due to greater foreign direct investment and international free trade, we get a better development of local businesses, which means local people have a chance to learn and borrow and use the models of those corporations in order to develop smaller areas. You get skill sharing, which is tremendously important in terms of a developing nation, and you get better radiation outwards to smaller areas. So because their side really doesn't defend smaller cities, but just wants to turn them into metropolises, because our side gets the initial foreign direct investment that is necessary to develop countries, and because we get better long-term sustainable development, we are very proud to stand for our model.
Thank you very much, Deputy Leader of Opposition. To end the substantive speech and cite the government, House calls Government Whip.
That's actually take the easiest stance within today's debate. I told you within the first speaker that, it's a trickle-down effect. But companies and FDIs who generally have that form of incentive to now go to smaller countries, smaller cities within under a proposal, I'm going to deconstruct that case on 3 levels. 2 issues for you today, right? First, let's take a step back and analyze whether or not there's a necessity within this policy. But secondly, let's also analyze both paradigms in terms of how is more sustainability better than the idea of it being a faster growth within their side. First issue, right? Let's analyze the idea of necessity within this policy. 2 levels for you today. Firstly, let's deconstruct that case on 3 issues. The idea on how they want the trickle-down effect within the long run, but secondly, the idea on how they're doing it faster within that policy, and thirdly, what a redistribution of wealth can happen in the future. All those trees within that case. Firstly, the idea of trickle-down effect. We don't think so. What is the incentive and what is the proper idea of why you want to have the trickle-down effect? Is assuming the possibility of doing so. That case prevents that on several levels. Firstly, the idea of the trickle-down effect does not happen because the concentration of wealth within only one proposal and one city as a whole is either to prevent it from going down. What is the incentive? Take a seat, sir. What is the incentive for individuals within the grounds now? Or what is the incentive within companies to have that trickle-down effect? It's because the proposal in terms of wanting to tax companies is not that. Companies will leave when you tax them because they realize you put a ceiling towards their profit and how much can naturally make growth in your companies. They incentivize companies to leave because companies realize if you're going to put a ceiling to how much profit I can make within your country, I will automatically leave. Secondly, the idea on how they're doing it faster. We never for doing it faster. We always go for sustainability. Why is sustainability very important? Because even within that proposal, even if they do it faster in terms of wanting to have that growth within one particular city, the sustainability as a country, multiple cities having that capacity to grow as a whole is that form of sustainability that we want. At least in our proposal, when corporations to only go to one particular area, but now realize there's a fair capacity within all nations or within all cities to have that form of growth. That's exactly the capacity that we realize that the form of sustainability and the amount of fair capacity for it to grow is very important. But secondly, right, why do they prevent and further prevent a redistribution of wealth? It's because they realize within if you only have one metropolis city, that's when you also have the idea of the rich remaining rich and the poor remaining poor. I.e., if that country continuously grows and the rich will always want to maintain at their state of power, they always lobby for more corporations to say. They will always lobby for the idea of them wanting to always remain rich. The people within the grounds also don't want to prioritize individuals. The governments need to do so. Secondly, right, the idea on how the redistribution of wealth of our FDI is doing so, we don't think so. Because the FDI, in terms of even if you want to agree that there is some form of benefit there, the FDI within a proposal only exists in one metropolis city. We think that's even worse. At least in our proposal, we have the fair capacity to do so. You also have the fair capacity of corporations to come in and generally to make that form of growth within our proposal. We think is better. But thirdly, right, the idea on how there is no opt-out system within our policy In the idea of individuals wanting to, even in the idea of them saying that, in fact, we don't think so. Companies' incentive in terms of wanting to go to a particular area or particular city is also dependent on a critical mass. Meaning, if we really proven to win our policy, it's a coerced choice, and individuals who automatically opt in with a metropolis city, you also get our critical mass. Individuals or companies as a whole don't have incentive to go towards the particular cities because they realize that the critical mass within that particular city is just not there. The coercion that we push within you to win our policy is that firstly, individuals clearly see the illusion and clearly recognize that this is a particular city which I can grow for. This is a particular city where corporations are always there, I will grow there. You make them and you coerce them to join so, but when they go there, they cannot opt out because they realize that the harm in terms of wanting to stay there is already there. They can no longer opt out. Fourthly, right? Sit down. Fourthly, right? The idea why the idea of redistribution can only happen within our policy. The redistribution of wealth happening from the beginning is very important in terms of how I want to grow in the near future. The proposal that they want to talk about is that, we will grow within one city, but the redistribution of wealth will happen in the near future. What is the redistribution of wealth or in terms of resources they will talk about? But before that, sure.
Why on earth can't the state redistribute wealth under our model? Like, that's literally what happens in the real world. Countries develop certain areas, they have higher taxation on their people, and then use that to channel funds back to smaller areas, such as in the Scandinavian model.
Look, the incentive that governments have to grow in terms of smaller cities is that they realize that it's more capacity in terms of making profit. The proposal they will talk about is, companies will now generally have their form of incentive to grow other smaller parts of society is not there. Because you have corporations that will only be concentrated within one place, the incentive for governments to grow other cities is not there. Corporations are not willing to leave because they realize the profit they can make here versus the profit they can make there is not the same almost within your policy. But thirdly, right, the idea why this can only happen within our policy. Generally within our policy, companies generally have their form of incentive to go and be in different parts of society because we realize the capacity and governments always realize how much profit can I make within society. At least in our proposal, companies don't have their mind that only one place or only Kuala Lumpur can I ever build that place. We create the form of capacity within smaller cities to grow. That's exactly what companies realize that, if the company is already here, I can go to another company, I can go to another city because I realize there is a fair capacity for me to grow the country. There's a fair capacity for me to stay and sustain within the country. We also incentivize companies to make your city grow, to increase the standard of living within the grounds because they realize they also need to generally hire people on the ground. They also need to generally make the idea of the same power of societies or make the same power of individuals on the ground the capacity of them buying a particular product. We think it's exactly the same. But secondly, it's even better in our policies when companies are generally will hire people because they realize that taking other people from different countries to bring in has a lot of work to do. You need to provide them places to stay. You need to bring their whole family here. You need to provide education. We think it's even better in our policies when you force governments or you force companies to generally prioritize people on the ground or which you enter to. Sit down. Conclusion my first issue that we think the form of necessity that exists in our policy and the form of necessity that exists in terms of having a form of equal platform in society is very important. Second issue, right? Let's analyze the idea and compare paradigms within what is the harms and what is the benefits within our proposal. So our proposal, yes, we can see that maybe it might take a longer time, but within the idea of sustainability, it's already there. Consecutively, within all three speakers, we told you within today's debate that it's not our aim to do in terms of bringing it faster within the economy as a whole has to be sustainable. Meaning, if you only concentrate one particular city, the idea of which other cities cannot be prioritized, or other cities generally will not have the form of economic benefit, then the idea of your whole country not having that form of economic benefit is even worse with your policy. We think when you start from scratch and you redistribute that wealth or redistribute that form of resources, it's much more effective in terms of how you want to grow. It's much more effective in terms of the whole economic benefit that you get with that proposal. But secondly, right, let's analyze that best case scenario because sure, Metropolises and you have that form of one concentrated city and you have multiple police stations and bigger roads. The incentive for them to now go to smaller cities is not there because in within smaller cities you have to start from scratch. If you have to start in terms of start by increasing the standard of a place where it's already been built, a place where it's easier for them to generally hire people, a place where it's easier for them to get profit. We think it's worse with their policies. Companies will not have an incentive. They are profit driven. They will always opt into a place which is easier to make money. There is no incentive for them to come to our smaller cities. You deprive individuals of their rights, but you also do the prioritization the wrong way. The long-term harm happens within your policy.
Thank you very much, Government Whip. To end the substantive speeches as a whole, House calls upon
I know we are the guys supporting corporations. That makes us very evil. But at the same time, we also care about people. This is what they want to do. They want to spread their current pool of resources across a thin layer, accessing as many small cities as possible. What we want to do, focus on key areas, develop them completely, and then move on. It's as simple as that. That is the dichotomy in this debate. First few problems. What's the problem with the fundamentals of their case? Now, in their Prime Minister's speech, they mentioned that they want small cities to become a metropolis one day. Then they go on to talk about congestion and high cost of living in metropolis. This is the problem. Is the problem with our policy that you want to reach out and develop as many small cities as possible holistically? Or is your problem with the case that they don't like metropolises as a whole? Because they want to develop those cities into metropolises, but yet they mention the problems of the metropolis as well. So a bit of tension in their case there. So we're going to deal with this on two levels. First issue, why you shouldn't hate metropolises, they are fine. And second of all, who achieves holistic growth? In other words, can our side reach out to as many small cities as possible and develop them as well, which is what you guys want? No, thank you guys. It's a bit early. I know you're just doing that to throw me off. Number one, why you shouldn't hate a metropolis? Here's the first problem they mentioned, higher cost of living. Well, yes, there is a higher cost of living in a metropolis, but this is partially because the people in those areas also earn higher wages. So it kind of balances out. Just because the things are more expensive in a metropolis doesn't mean that's a problem if you're also earning more. No, Ryan, it's a bit too short of time. Don't be a pogo stick. Now, also within those same metropolises, they have a wider range of goods and services because there are multiple suppliers in the same metropolises giving you goods. This means that you're not reliant on a single supplier, and hence price exploitation is less of a problem in a metropolis. Compare this to your small cities. In a small city, the problem there is that the market share, the population there is too small to sustain more than one company. More than one company can't survive and thrive there. What do we call this? No, thank you. We call this a natural monopoly, where only one company can reasonably survive within a particular area and thrive. Meaning, prevent price exploitation, if you want to keep prices down, you need to have that healthy competition to exist. And healthy competition can only exist within areas where the population can sustain that healthy competition. No, thank you. But the second problem they had was in metropolises, we have congestions and we have slums. Now, this isn't a problem inherent within a metropolis. For example, no one associates Sydney and Tokyo with slums. That's because they had proper ways of developing the metropolises. Delhi, India, maybe not so good. No, thank you guys. So, but the thing over here is that this is the problem with half-hearted development. When you get slums and you get congestion, when you think about the way you develop your country, because you're focusing on multiple areas, you forget to complete the area. Make sure that it's sustainable before you move on to another area. So if slums and congestion that you are talking about is more likely to happen on your side, but instead of concentrating on the area and making sure it's sustainable, you're spreading your resources all around and not completing that area and making it sustainable before you move on. So that's a problem on your side, congestion and slums. No, thank you, because ultimately the population is going to exist and they're going to have to exist somewhere, at least make that somewhere sustainable. But the third problem they had is that there's this idea that the only way to achieve happiness in life is if you're in a metropolis. Well, this is the first argument because everyone around you is of the happy. This is another way of saying, let's all suffer together and convince ourselves that we are happy. I don't think that's a very convincing idea on your side. But principally, no thank you. If you can make an argument in the second speaker's speech saying that people who are around the same status are happy, then you're also against redistribution, because as long as people can live together in the same status, you have no need for redistribution on your side because, well, they're living together and they're supposed to convince themselves that they're happy. Thank you. But second of all, how about corporate advertisements brought up by the second speaker as well? Well, to advertise the metropolis, they advertise their product. They don't say buy these Oreos in Kuala Lumpur, they just say buy these Oreos. So I don't think that corporations are trying to influence you to go into a metropolis. If anything, they want you to buy their product regardless of where you are, be it in a rural area or whatever. All those Petronas and Merdeka advertisements, they're all said in kampongs lah, so not so convincing. No thank you. But third of all, what's wrong if people really think that the notion of a good life lies in the metropolis? The thing over here is, if you want the choice exists. If you want to stay in your small kampong and you think that it makes you a happy person, there's no problem with that. If you want the opportunity to take on the big apple, the big city, That choice exists, but it doesn't exist on your side, where everything is a small city, where everything is developing slowly, where everything has a substandard power of living. The choice for people to attain their notion of a good life, be it in an urban, suburban, or a rural area, doesn't exist on your side, because everything develops on the same pace. Yes?
Your policy can only function when one metropolis city is fully developed and every provide for other cities. Assuming your one fails, at least in our policy, other cities can be built up and
Yeah.
Okay, I really don't get the point of that POI, because it assumes that the metropolis is going to fail, but on your side you say if our cities fail, we just focus on us. That's like, okay, we have multiple cities, let's throw away one when it doesn't work and then focus on other small cities. That's not very sustainable, because you're losing a lot of resources on your side. Thank you guys, you don't offer a POI just after you give me POI. Okay, number 2, who achieves holistic economic growth? Let's establish on our side that smaller cities are not ignored completely under our policy. Why is this so? 2 reasons. Number 1, smaller cities naturally radiate away from bigger cities and bigger metropolises. We call these satellite cities. Places like Petaling Jaya 40 years ago were not very developed, but now they are. What is the good thing about the smaller cities on our side when they radiate away from metropolises? The fact is that these smaller cities had the pre-existing network of resources from the metropolis, so they can develop even faster on our side. So smaller cities, upon the existence of metropolis, can exist and they can develop faster. But also land constraints mean that you're naturally going to seek out more areas to develop. But second of all, by virtue of being a developing country, you have a limited pool of resources. So let's look at the problem of spreading those resources thin when you're starting developing of a country. Number 1, public services are you build a police department in every single small city. The problem with those police departments in your small city is that they're expensive and of low quality. For example, New York Police Department has a huge sphere of influence. It's more cost efficient than smaller departments, and it shares keys with other police departments in the area. That means public services on our side and the big metropolis are also good for every other public service around, and they're also cheaper. But companies are not going to, the question when it comes to companies is, are they going to enter your country to begin with? On your side, they're not going to enter the country because they don't have the assurance of market share, they don't have the assurance of infrastructure and labor diversity on your side. On our side, it exists, they can enter, and once they enter, they're willing to spread out because they have that confidence. The fact remains as this: you're spreading your resources thin, you're not developing your countries, your cities, we are just simply moving on, assuming everyone grows at the same rate, but everyone loses out altogether. Thank you.
With beginner replies, speeches as a whole, also one outline.
The big problem in this debate was a misdirection of motives and incentives. Governments will operate against profit motives in the interest of their country. That's what they're elected to do. Corporations will not. Their side wants to entrust the job of redistributing resources to corporations that don't have a motive to do so, when the more efficient solution will be to maximize the incentives of those corporations to make profit, and then use the natural incentive of a government to redistribute wealth and use the money that you have now gained via that foreign direct investment. Their side is fighting a losing battle to begin with, because the amount of money that they lose via excluding the opportunity for development in major metropolises means that they are already using much less money than we are. More worse than that, they are spreading resources across a large number of areas, which means that they get worse development for all those areas, they get less development for all those areas, and they get less opportunity to grow in the entire country. I'm going to ask 3 questions. Firstly, what was their problem? Secondly, which side solves it better? They had a couple of problems. The first was the rich-poor gap. Yes, this is a non-contentious issue. We both agree inequality is the problem. The question was how to solve it. If indeed is that at the same time, why would you not want to get it done faster? Surely making people live in poverty for less of a time is a worthy goal to achieve. That's why it's substantive. But why the in our gets it done better, because this was the only response we heard to our entire analysis about why corporations have an incentive to enter in ours. Right? Oh, no. They'll always remain in Kuala Lumpur, they'll never radiate outwards. Okay, here's a bit of simple logic. There is a limit to how far Kuala Lumpur can grow. There is a limit to how much the corporation can expand in Kuala Lumpur. When that ability is reached, that limit is reached, corporations naturally have an incentive to maximize the human capital of the rest of the country and expand outwards. That's why in the real world, if you apply the logic, it doesn't work. Because corporations may have an initial incentive to enter in one area, but they naturally radiate outwards once their capacity is maxed out in that area. And this was our incentive from the first figure about economies of scale. Because your ability to grow is much better in the metropolis at first, it means that your pool of resources becomes bigger and your ability to implement that same model across the entire nation becomes much higher. And this is too important because your side diminishes the initial starting point, which means that the amount of funds that you use to trickle back to the people in the long term are worse. They say, we fail. Well, we have other cities, you don't have anything else. Okay, but that was the debate about the probability of failure. Your side makes it much more probable that you get nothing because your resources are spread very thin in a country that already is fighting an uphill battle to begin with. Our side means that even our failure is better than your best case success. Our failure might mean that our development isn't as good, but that is still better than your case, where you get a bunch of disconnected cities that really can't do much in terms of redistributive capacity because they aren't making as much money, they aren't attracting as many people, and they aren't doing as much for the country. That's why even in our worst case scenario, if you examine a country like Malaysia, they might argue oversaturation. Fine, but that's great because it means that in the long term, when there's no more jobs left in Kuala Lumpur, people expand outwards and find jobs in other areas. Why would people want to live in countries where unemployment is high? That's why there's a natural incentive for the market to solve and for people to go to areas where it's strategically important. In the long term, their side only wants one thing: less inequality. That's a great motive. Unfortunately, their side doesn't solve it. They choose to implement and give the job to a corporation that doesn't have an incentive to do so. We think it's far better to get that money flowing into our country and then use the incentive of the government to redistribute that wealth. That is something that's very realistic that we can do, and we are very proud to oppose.
Thank you very much, Honorable Ready to end the debate and House calls upon government.
We saw this debate in two clashes, and we think we won both of them. First, will small cities become metropolises, or whose side does it faster? Second, which side better benefits individuals on the ground, right? Let's look at the first issue. Will small cities become metropolis? Both sides concede that this will happen, or there has a possibility of happening. The question then becomes, which side does it faster? They said they do. Why so? The only justification they gave you was FDIs in this instance, right? And somehow FDIs will lead to redistribution of wealth, stuff like that, right? We don't think that that's necessarily true. Why so? From the get-go, from prior stage, we already told you the mindsets of rich people within these cities, right? If they want to live in the comfort that they want to live in, they will constantly lobby for policies that specifically focus on benefiting metropolises, will never care about individuals living outside. The redistribution of wealth under your side will never happen. They will have the politicians, if they want to stay in power, will never have an incentive to spread to other cities, right? On the second level, what's the comparative in this instance, right? Between collective growth and FDIs in this instance, right? When you have FDIs redistributing, you only have a small money being redistributed to begin with, right? But when you have collective growth, you have all the cities build up together collectively. That's something came out case, right? Now the second idea on investors, right? They told us that investors will benefit or will invest everywhere and things like that, right? We don't think that's true. Why so? Within the first level, there's a large market within metropolises in themselves, right? Why are already characterized to you why individuals will want to go towards cities to begin with, right? We think recognizing that, we think it has the largest market, and because it has the largest market, it has the highest price in this instance. We think the companies to want to only invest within metropolises to begin with, right, and not other areas. But then under their paradigm, they decided to make it worse. They said we'll make it tax-free in this instance, directly incentivizing companies to only invest within metropolis to begin with. You never allow them to. On the second idea, they want that more likely to invest in cities, but still that will somehow lead them to investing in other places as well, right? We don't think that's true either. Because even if you want to buy the benefits, we think if you want to invest in another area, because all of your resources is focused solely on metropolises, to build in smaller cities, you have to start from scratch. We think there's a direct deterrent from companies to be able to want to invest there to begin with, right? I think under our side, they're more likely to invest any solely on metropolises, right? We think you create a long-term harm. On this third idea, right? They said the harms occur on our side too because we want metropolises as well. Our arguments are against one metropolis, Mr. Speaker, not collective metropolises, right? We think on our side, when you have collective metropolises, that's when all the benefits that they wanted to accrue come to our side, and all the benefits that come from metropolises come to us as well. But Kim, but even if you want to argue that does this right, Kim said under our side this, right? She told you, and she showed Aaron a POI, which she didn't respond to, right? We said under our side, if you have a metropolis that fails in this instance, right, your country is directly jeopardized in this instance. But when you have many metropolises, if one fails, you still have the capability for individuals to sustain themselves. We think we prove at least a marginal benefit under our side that they don't. On the second issue, which side better benefits individuals on the ground? First, we told you that it's a coerced choice, right? That because it's happiness, individuals who want to opt in. From Davis Ross is not part of the debate. Then Aaron decided to respond to it, and he told us this, right? People in metropolises, because they're surrounded by people just like them, my argument was against individuals who don't live in metropolises, who are forced to look at metropolises and concede that that's the idea of happiness to begin with, right? But not just that, they told us that okay, fine, the companies will only go for their products, right? But here's the argument, Mr. Speaker: if the company is for a real estate in this instance, right? Of course, you want individuals to come towards metropolises to begin with. We want on that argument, right? The second idea on rich poor gap in this instance, right? You say that you won't get it faster under our side. We won't solve the rich poor gap. We don't think so. Why? Because when we were solely on metropolises to begin with, and they never redirect their attention elsewhere, you never solve the rich poor gap. You constantly leave poor people to be poor people, you constantly leave rich people to be rich people. But under our comparative, when you have investors going towards everywhere, you allow collective growth, you allow for the rich poor gap to not exist within our paradigm. We think we solve this. But it's not idea, our cities will expand. Look, Mr. Speaker, here's the idea, right? We told you already from the get-go, right, that there's a long-term benefit. They told you that 40 years for Petaling Jaya to develop, right? And then from KL, right? And KL just developed to Petaling Jaya and never developed further than that, right, Mr. Speaker? We think we win this issue. For all these reasons, we think it's a clear government.
Thank you.